This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
The Brazilian way of life, a combination of diverse nature and extraordinarily rich culture, where people from different backgrounds live in harmony. You'll be greeted by a modern, young and sensational country from the second you arrive. The world meets in Brazil. Come celebrate life.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Global Village. I'm your host, Buddy Kunanan. Now, you know, folks, on this show, we take you around the world and you go to interesting places and meet amazing people. Today's focus is Brazil, a very interesting country and a cultural and economic powerhouse. Now, you know, Brazil is a multicultural, diverse country and one of the it's actually the fifth largest country by land area in the world and the sixth most populous one in the world as well. And joining us today, we're very honored and privileged to have a very nice and very special guest on the show, none other than the Ambassador of Brazil to the Philippines, His Excellency Rodrigo do Amaral Souza. Ambassador, welcome to Global Village.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
I'm so happy that you're here, Ambassador, because as I mentioned in my opening spiel, Brazil is such an interesting country. I mean, it's so diverse, it's so huge. And it's a pleasure to bring this now to the awareness of Filipino viewers, because our objective here in Global Village is to make our viewers aware of our neighbors and our brothers and sisters in the global community. Now, Ambassador, let's talk about you and your background. Tell us, who is Ambassador Souza?
Well, I was born in São Paulo. It's the largest city in Brazil. I was graduated in business administration. I started working as an executive in one of our largest supermarket chains. But I wasn't satisfied with the work I had. I was looking for other career choices. And then one day my father, he called me, look, there's a story here in the newspapers talking about the examinations for the diplomatic career. I think that would be very adequate for you. Then I started looking for information about the diplomatic career, and well, I was interested. I thought that it was perfectly suited for me, and in 1981 I joined the diplomatic service in Brazil, and since then, well, I've been working as a diplomat.
How nice, what a nice story. Let's talk about your past postings, Ambassador. Where have you been assigned prior to to the Philippines?
My first destination was Buenos Aires. It was at the end of the 80s. And then I returned to Brazil. That was not a very usual move for a junior diplomat, but that was for personal reasons. Then I got married. And together with my wife, we went to Chile, Santiago. And there my son was born in Santiago. From Santiago, we went to Italy. We stayed 4 years in Rome.
Oh, very nice.
Then we returned to Brazil, and we spent 12 years in Brasilia, which is also not very usual for a diplomat. And then I was assigned to Manila. That's my first experience as an ambassador, and I'm enjoying it very much so far.
Very good, very good. And how has your stay been? I mean, what is your experience like living in the Far East, living in the Philippines?
The geographical distance can be a barrier, of course. It's more difficult to receive friends, also to receive authorities from Brazil.
Yes.
And of course, tourists. They arrive here, but they don't arrive in very large numbers. And we have to adapt to a different mindset, to a different culture. But we also have many points in common with the Philippines that facilitate this adaptation.
Okay. What are these similarities, Ambassador? Interesting.
Well, we were both colonized by Christian countries and countries from the Iberian Peninsula, which share many things. And first of all, I would mention the religion, Christian religion, all the traditions that are derived from the Catholic faith. We also see in Brazil those festivities, the street processions.
Very
like
similar here.
the Santo Niño or the Black Nazarene. There are similar festivities in Brazil.
So you feel at home here, Ambassador?
I feel
in
very
Manila.
much at home. And the Latin culture. Many words in Tagalog that come from Spanish and are all immediately recognizable for us Brazilians. You know that Brazilian, Portuguese and Spanish are very similar.
Yes, yes. Let's talk about Brazil, Ambassador. And this is such a pleasure to do this show because for Filipinos, Brazil is so far away. I mean, not just geographically, but also in terms of awareness. When you talk to Filipinos, the most common thing that comes to one's mind is football. Of course, all the best footballers come from your country, starting with Pelé,
They used
the
to
legendary, the legendary Pelé.
Yeah,
There. So let's talk about your country, Ambassador.
Okay. Well, of course, we are sports crazy in Brazil.
Yes.
You mentioned football. That's our passion. It's by far the most popular sport in Brazil. And we had some of the best players in that sport, like Pelé, like Ronaldo, like Ronaldinho, and now Neymar, and so on. It's still undisputedly the most popular sports. But we also have other sports like volleyball, car racing, that is very popular in Brazil as well. And I think that Brazil is the only Portuguese-speaking country in South America, which makes us unique in that region. And one thing that also differentiates Brazil from other countries in our region is the racial mix of the population. We have populations that came from Europe,
Yes.
the Portuguese, the native peoples, the indigenous peoples, the black population that came from Africa to work as slaves in Brazil. And then, beginning at the end of the 19th century, we received many waves of migrants from Europe and from Japan and
Yes.
from Arab countries as well.
What is it about Brazil, Ambassador, that draws people there, that drew people there, historically, traditionally?
I think just like the U.S., Brazil was viewed and still is viewed in many ways as a land of opportunity. It's a vast country that offers opportunities in many fields. And we needed people to work at that time. We had abolished slavery, and we needed people to work at the plantations. At that time, coffee was our most important economic product. So the Italians and Japanese, the first waves of migrants, came to Brazil to work at the coffee plantations.
Yes.
And then they started working in many other occupations, and they are now very well integrated into our society.
I'm glad you mentioned Japanese because there's a huge Japanese population. If the surveys are correct, between 1.5 and 2.5 million
That's
Japanese
right.
living in Brazil, and that's a big number.
Actually, it's the largest Japanese community outside Japan. And they are very respected in Brazil because they are seen as hardworking people, and they are very committed to what they do. And now the first generations were somewhat isolated. They only got married within the community. But now the new generations absolutely integrated.
They're culturally born and bred. They're Brazilians.
They're Brazilians. They
Yes.
speak Portuguese. Some of them began to return to Japan when the Brazilian economy went into depression or recession. When they arrived in Japan, they couldn't speak the language of their ancestors. They only speak Portuguese.
Ambassador, this big Japanese population in Brazil, do you see, is there influence in the culture, local culture,
course.
palpable?
Of course, you will find some of the best Japanese restaurants in the world in São Paulo.
Bravo. Bravo.
And sushi is very common in Brazil. And many words in Japanese words are very well known all over the country.
Yes. I'm glad we're talking about this topic of multicultural, this multicultural topic, because all of my friends who've been to Brazil, who visited at one point or another, all come back with stories about how people are actually so, it's so well integrated, the different peoples, cultures, and races you have in your country. There's, as you mentioned, there's Europeans, Spanish, Portuguese, some Germans, Italians, and now you have the, of course, Africans, and you have the Japanese, and now possibly Chinese as well. What is it about Brazilian society that makes it work so well? That, this integration, this harmony you've created?
Yeah. I think that this began with the Portuguese. The Portuguese did not have any prejudice in mixing with the indigenous populations and the blacks, even in marriage, in many occasions. But we cannot deny that there is still racial prejudice in Brazil.
Yes.
That's a fact of life.
Happens everywhere.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. But what the state has always tried to do is to fight against discrimination. So racial discrimination is a very serious criminal offense in Brazil. And those who violate laws against racial discrimination are subject to imprisonment. And it's something that is very badly viewed in Brazil, racial discrimination. So we must always be vigilant
Yes.
to that.
So there's a strong push by the state
That's
to
right.
really make this, inculcate this in the mindset of people. We're all Brazilians, and just one people, one nation, and one language.
But of course, unlike other countries, we have never had systems of separation or segregation between ethnic groups.
Yes. And I understand in Brazil, well, this is a practice not just in a lot of countries where they have hyphenated citizenship, so to speak. Like here in the
right.
Philippines, we call some people Filipino Canadian or Filipino American, which I personally am against when you talk about nation building. I understand in your country, it's really just Brazilians. That's how you refer to
Yes,
yourselves.
that's right.
Regardless of your
Regardless
ethnicity.
of the surname of the person, of his personal appearance, that person is referred to as Brazilian, period. And that's one of the reasons why our passport is so highly valued, because looking from the physical appearance, anyone can be a Brazilian.
Even me.
Even you, of course.
No, bravo, Ambassador. Let's talk about the Portuguese language. I understand a very interesting tidbit of trivia. Portuguese is the national language of Brazil, but I understand that it really is one of the unifiers of your country, the language. I mean, there are many dialects, if at all, in Brazil.
No, there are no dialects in Brazil.
There are no dialects, okay.
We have only regional accents, regional expressions. but one single language across the country. And well, that's in a way, it's a miracle for a country so big and so vast
Absolutely.
as Brazil. We have managed to consolidate one single language. And well, that's one of the things that make Brazil unique in our region.
That's quite an admirable feat to think about. As you mentioned, Ambassador, the country is so big. It's the 5th largest in the world, and 8.5 million square kilometers.
That's right.
And for this big...
If you compare it to the U.S.,
Yes.
if you take Alaska out of the U.S., just the continental U.S. without Alaska, we are bigger than the
Just the
US.
contiguous part of
Yeah, the
America, you're
contiguous.
actually bigger. That's
Yes,
amazing.
that's right.
And for you to only have one language is a sign of, I think it has contributed to the development of Brazilian nationhood.
We are also the 5th most populated country in the world, after China, India, the U.S., and Indonesia. We are the 5th.
That's amazing. And as I mentioned in my opening spiel, you are the Brazilian economy goes through ups and downs, but
That's
you are
right.
recognized as part of BRICS, which is that
Part
the
of
new
the BRICS,
grouping.
we have been one of the 10 largest economies in the world for the last 2 decades. And well, that can change according to the exchange rate. But we have at some point reached the point of being the 6th largest economy in the world.
That is amazing. That is amazing. How is the economy today, Ambassador?
It
How
is
is it doing?
recovering from a deep recession, 2 consecutive years, 2015 and 2016, of 3% negative growth. And in 2017, we had growth, 1%, and the expectations that by the end of 2018, we will have a 3% growth.
Oh, very good.
So
Very good.
the current government has managed to reverse the fiscal imbalance. That's
Very
the
good.
greatest problem of our economy.
And unemployment is under control. I saw somewhere at 6%, which is not bad.
No,
Yeah.
underemployment, well, we had a peak in unemployment, but compared to international levels, that's very reasonable.
Yes. And Brazil is a mixed economy and, of course, huge natural resources. Aside from natural resources, Ambassador, what are the main drivers of the economy?
Well, we have a very diversified economy. Agriculture is very important in Brazil. Brazil is the first or second exporter of many agricultural commodities.
And the top exporter of coffee. I
Yeah,
understand.
that's right.
Yes.
Sugar cane.
Yes, yes.
The top exporter of meat in the world.
I think you even export meat here to the Philippines, if I'm not
That's right.
mistaken.
We
Yes.
export beef, chicken, and also small quantities of pork.
Do you have better beef than your neighbors in Argentina?
No, I could not say that. Let's say that we share excellent beef,
Very
Brazil
good.
and Argentina. Yeah.
Very good, sir. So, sir, we have to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk more about Brazil's relationship with the Philippines and with Asia at large, and we'll also talk about what has been done in the last few years to really strengthen Philippine-Brazilian relations. Thank you, sir. So, guys, stick around because more of Brazil Sensational when Global Village returns.
Brazil is preparing to welcome you. We've tidied up the garden, the mirrors, expanded the kitchen, the veranda. We've built the party rooms, planned the lighting, switched on the AC, turned on the showers. We've made the beds and organized the living room. The stage is being prepared for the sporting events in Brazil. Come on over. You'll feel right at home. The world meets in Brazil. Come celebrate life.